fiancée choked the black maid to silence her, but the maid's toddler made one choice that opened the billionaire's eyes. There are only two people in that house who know every single secret hiding behind that woman's smile: a housekeeper and a 3-year-old girl who hasn't learned how to lie yet. For months they watched. For months they said nothing because no one believed them and no one asked. But on one ordinary afternoon, the fiancée made a choice she couldn't take back. She put her hands around the housekeeper's throat to keep her quiet forever. What she didn't count on was a toddler small enough to slip past her, and fast enough to reach a phone before it was too late. Hey, welcome back, friend. If this is your first time here, this channel is all about real, raw, emotional stories, the kind that stick with you long after the video ends. Quick question before we start. Where are you watching from today? Drop your flag in the comments. We love seeing you all from around the world. This story coming up is one of the most intense ones we've ever told, so stay with us to the very end, because you will not see this ending coming. Some people build their whole lives around watching. That's exactly what saved a family. Thomas Reyes was 43 years old, and by almost every measure that mattered to the outside world, he had made it. He'd built a logistics company from a single delivery van into a fleet that stretched across 4 states, and the brick colonial house he lived in sat at the end of a quiet street in a suburb outside Charlotte, North Carolina, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns were always trimmed and neighbors waved from their porches on Sunday mornings. Thomas worked long hours, the kind that started before sunrise and often didn't end until after dark, because that was the only language he really knew how to speak. Effort, discipline, more effort. He hadn't always been alone in that big house. His mother had lived with him for years after his father passed, filling the place with the smell of Sunday dinners and the sound of daytime television turned up too loud. When she passed away 3 years ago, the house had gone silent in a way Thomas hadn't expected to feel so deeply. He wasn't a man who talked about grief. He just worked harder, came home later, and let the quiet fill in around him like water finding its level. Into that quiet came Ava Bennett. Ava was 40 years old, a widow herself, raising her 3-year-old daughter Ella on her own after her husband died in a car accident when Ella was still a baby. She'd been hired as Thomas's live-in housekeeper a little over a year ago, back when the house still felt too big and too empty for one man to manage on top of running a company. Ava was steady, sharp, and endlessly patient, the kind of woman who noticed when the mail carrier was running late or when a storm was rolling in before the weather app even caught it. She kept the house running so smoothly that Thomas sometimes forgot how much work it actually took, which was, in its own way, the highest compliment he could have paid her. Little Ella grew up in that house the way some kids grow up in the backseat of a car, present for almost everything, seen by almost no one important, but soaking in more than anyone realized. She had her mother's watchful eyes and an unusually calm, observant nature for a 3-year-old. She didn't babble the way some toddlers did. She watched, she listened, and she remembered things far longer than most adults gave her credit for. Because Thomas worked such long hours, Ava and Ella were the only 2 people who spent real time inside that house day after day. They knew which floorboards creaked. They knew what time the mailman came. And eventually, they came to know things about the newest addition to the household that Thomas himself hadn't figured out yet. Her name was Harper Lang. 29 years old, effortlessly beautiful, with a kind of magnetic charm that made every room feel warmer the moment she walked into it. Thomas had met her at a business conference in Atlanta, where she'd introduced herself as an event coordinator between contracts, admired his work ethic, and told him, over drinks that stretched into the early morning, that she'd never met a man so committed to the people who depended on him. Thomas, lonely in ways he rarely let himself admit, had fallen fast. Within 4 months, Harper had moved into the house. Within 7, there was a ring on her finger. To Thomas, Harper was warm, attentive, endlessly supportive of his long work hours. She packed his lunches some mornings, sent him sweet texts during the day, greeted him at the door with a glass of wine and a listening ear when he came home exhausted. It was, by every outward appearance, Exactly the kind of partnership a busy, grieving man could be grateful for. But Ava saw something different. She saw Harper's mood shift the second Thomas's car pulled out of the driveway each morning, the warmth draining out of her voice like water down a sink. She saw Harper take phone calls in hushed, clipped tones in the garden, glancing over her shoulder every few seconds to check if anyone was listening. She saw unfamiliar men occasionally park down the street rather than in the driveway, men Harper always met outside rather than inviting them in. And she noticed, because a housekeeper notices everything whether she wants to or not, that Harper never once asked Ava a single personal question in over 5 months of living in the same house. Not about Ella. Not about her late husband. Not about anything at all. It was as if Harper had already decided from day one that Ava wasn't a person worth knowing. Just a piece of furniture that happened to clean up after her. Ella noticed things too, in her own small way. She noticed that Harper's voice changed the moment Thomas's car left the driveway, sweet and soft, turning sharp and clipped in an instant. She noticed that Harper never smiled at her the way other grown-ups did, not even the fake, polite smile most adults gave to children they didn't particularly like. She noticed that Harper sometimes looked at her and her mother the way you'd look at a stain you couldn't quite get out of the carpet, irritated and a little bit disgusted. Ava never said a word to Thomas about any of it, not directly, not in those early months. What could she even say? Your fiancé's voice changes when you're not around wasn't the kind of thing you brought to your employer without sounding paranoid. Or worse, like you were trying to sabotage his happiness out of some kind of jealousy. Ava kept her head down, did her job, and quietly, carefully, kept her eyes open, because something in her gut, the same instinct that had once told her not to trust the mechanic who said her husband's car was fine days before the accident that took him, was telling her that something about Harper Lang did not add up. She didn't know yet just how right that instinct would turn out to be. She didn't know that the quiet, careful watching she and her daughter had been doing for months was about to become the only thing standing between Thomas and something far darker than a broken engagement. Do you think Ava should have said something to Thomas sooner, even without proof? Let us know what you think in the comments below. The quietest people in a house often see the most, and say the least until they can't stay silent anymore. Winter came and went, and by early spring, the cracks in Harper's carefully built performance had started showing more often, at least to the two people paying close enough attention to notice. Thomas remained blissfully unaware, wrapped up in a merger that was consuming nearly all his waking hours, trusting Harper completely with the wedding planning, the household decisions, and increasingly, decisions about his personal finances that he probably should have paid closer attention to. Ava had started keeping a mental list, the kind she never planned on sharing with anyone unless she absolutely had to. Harper had asked Thomas, gently and sweetly over dinner one night, about restructuring some of his investment accounts to simplify things before the wedding. She'd suggested more than once that his life insurance policy should be updated now that they were practically family. She'd pushed, subtly but persistently, for Thomas to sign over partial ownership of the house itself as a gesture of commitment, something Thomas had brushed off with a laugh, telling her there was plenty of time for that after the wedding. Ava, dusting nearby during that particular conversation, had felt a chill run straight through her that had nothing to do with the spring air coming through the open window. Ella, in her own small orbit, had started avoiding Harper altogether, something Ava noticed with a mother's careful eye. Her daughter, normally curious and willing to wander toward anyone in the house, had taken to sticking close to Ava's side whenever Harper was nearby, watching the woman with the same wary stillness a small animal gives to something it senses is dangerous, even if it can't explain why. Once, when Harper had reached out to smooth Ella's hair back from her face in front of Thomas, a gesture that looked sweet and maternal from the outside, Ella had flinched so hard she'd nearly knocked over a lamp. Thomas had laughed it off as toddler shyness. Ava had felt her stomach drop. The unfamiliar men kept appearing, too, more frequently now. One in particular, a lean, sharp-featured man who always wore the same gray jacket regardless of the weather, had started showing up at least once a week, always parking down the block, always meeting Harper in the side garden where the hedges blocked the view from most of the house's windows. Except one. The laundry room window, which Ava happened to pass by nearly every single day. She'd caught fragments of their conversations over the following weeks. Never enough to piece together the full picture, but enough to make the hair on the back of her neck stand up every time. Words like timeline. Words like once it's finalized. Once, chillingly, a phrase that made Ava freeze completely in the laundry room doorway, basket of towels forgotten in her arms. He trusts her completely. It won't even look suspicious. Ava didn't know what it referred to. She told herself for weeks that it could mean anything. A business deal, a surprise party, something completely innocent that her overactive imagination had twisted into something sinister. But the feeling in her gut refused to settle, and it grew heavier every single day. She almost told Thomas twice. The first time, she'd knocked on his study door late one evening, ready to explain everything she'd seen and heard, only to lose her nerve the moment he looked up from his laptop, exhausted and stressed from work, and she thought about how it would sound. A housekeeper accusing his fiancée of something she couldn't even name, based on overheard fragments and a toddler's discomfort. She'd made up an excuse about needing his signature on a grocery budget, and left without saying what she came to say. The second time was worse. She'd actually started the conversation, telling Thomas gently that she'd noticed Harper seemed to spend a lot of time with a man in a gray jacket, that maybe it was worth asking about. Thomas's face had darkened, not with concern for himself, but with something Ava hadn't expected: defensiveness on Harper's behalf. That's her cousin's business partner, Ava. He's helping her plan a surprise for the wedding. I'd appreciate it if you didn't spread rumors about the woman I'm about to marry. His tone hadn't been cruel exactly, but it had been final, closing the door on the conversation before it had really opened. Ava had apologized, gone back to her work, and quietly decided that unless she had real, undeniable proof, there was no point risking her job, and by extension her daughter's stability, chasing a feeling she couldn't fully explain. She told herself to keep her head down, keep working, keep watching Ella closely, and trust that whatever was happening, if it was truly dangerous, would eventually surface in a way even Thomas couldn't ignore. She had no idea how soon that moment would come, or how close it would bring her to losing everything. Meanwhile, in the side garden, behind the hedges that blocked the view from every window except one, Harper and the man in the gray jacket were no longer discussing vague timelines. Their plans had moved from careful and abstract to something far more concrete, far more permanent, and far more dangerous than a wedding surprise. A plan that, if it succeeded, would leave Harper in control of everything Thomas had spent his life building, with no one left standing in her way at all. Have you ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be more serious than you imagined? Tell us in the comments, we want to hear your story. And then, on one ordinary afternoon, everything Ava feared became horrifyingly real. It was a Tuesday, warm and unremarkable, the kind of early summer afternoon where the biggest concern in most households was whether to run the sprinklers before the heat set in. Thomas had left for the office before 7 that morning, deep into the final week of closing his merger, telling Harper over coffee that he might not be home until well after dark. Harper had kissed him goodbye at the door with what looked, to any casual observer, like genuine affection. The moment his car disappeared down the street, Harper's expression shifted the way it always did, soft warmth draining away, replaced by something colder, more focused. She made a phone call from the kitchen that afternoon, her voice low but not quite low enough, and Ava, folding laundry in the next room with Ella playing quietly at her feet, caught something she was never meant to hear. It has to happen this week. He's finalizing the merger Friday, which means the new life insurance policy goes into effect Thursday night. After that, it's clean. No suspicion, no complications. Just an unfortunate accident for a stressed, overworked man. I know how it sounds. That's exactly why it's going to work. Ava's blood turned to ice standing in that laundry room. This wasn't a surprise party. This wasn't a business deal. Harper was planning something that could end with Thomas dead, and doing it with cold, careful precision, discussing his life like it was a line item to be closed out. Ava's hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the basket of towels she was holding. She needed to get out, needed to get to a phone, needed to warn someone, anyone, before Thursday. She scooped Ella up without a word, moving as quietly and quickly as she could toward the back hallway, her mind racing through options. Call the police, call Thomas directly, get out of the house first and figure out the rest from somewhere safe. She didn't make it to the door. Harper stepped out of the kitchen just as Ava reached the hallway. Phone call finished, and the look on Ava's face, pale, wide-eyed, clutching Ella just a little too tightly, told Harper instantly that she'd heard something she shouldn't have. Ava! Harper's voice was deathly calm, which was somehow far more frightening than shouting would have been. What exactly did you hear? I didn't hear anything, Ava said quickly, backing toward the door, every instinct screaming at her to run. I was just taking Ella outside to play. We'll be out of your way. Don't. Harper moved fast, faster than Ava expected from a woman who spent most of her time perfecting her appearance in mirrors. She grabbed Ava's arm and yanked her back from the door with startling strength, and in the scramble, Ella slipped from her mother's grip and stumbled backward into the hallway, small and terrified, but unnoticed for one crucial moment as the two women struggled. You've been watching me for months, Harper hissed, her carefully polished composure finally, completely cracking. You and that kid, always in the corners, always listening. I have worked too hard, too long, to let some housekeeper ruin everything now. What happened next unfolded in a matter of seconds that would replay in Ava's mind for the rest of her life. Harper's hands closed around Ava's throat, pinning her against the wall with a strength born of pure panic and desperation, cutting off her air, her vision starting to blur at the edges as she clawed uselessly at Harper's wrists. This wasn't a threat. This wasn't a warning. Harper had crossed a line there would be no walking back from, because in that moment, silencing Ava permanently had become the only thing standing between her and everything she had spent months, maybe years, building toward. And in the middle of that hallway, 3-year-old Ella watched her mother being choked against the wall by the woman she had never trusted, and something in that small, quiet, watchful child snapped into pure, terrified action. What would you do if you were in Ava's place? Silenced for knowing the truth, with your child watching? Tell us honestly in the comments. A 3-year-old doesn't know what 911 means for logic or law. She just knows who saves people. Ella didn't scream. She didn't freeze either, the way so many adults might have in that same moment of pure horror. Instead, some small, fierce instinct took over, the same watchful nature that had made her notice every flinch, every locked door, every changed tone of voice over the past several months kicked into a different kind of action entirely. She scrambled backward down the hallway on her small hands and knees, out of Harper's line of sight, and did the only thing she knew to do. She'd watched her mother do it 100 times. The phone on the kitchen counter, the one Ava always answered with a cheerful Reyes residence. Ella climbed onto the kitchen chair she'd learned to push against the counter for exactly this kind of reaching, grabbed the cordless phone with small, shaking hands, and pressed the single button she recognized from countless times watching her mother call Thomas to ask what he wanted for dinner. The speed dial button, worn smooth from use, that connected directly to Thomas's cell phone. It rang 3 times before he picked up, his voice distracted, mid-conversation with someone in his office. Hey, everything okay? I'm actually about to head into a... Daddy Thomas, Ella said, the name she'd started using for him months ago, quietly, when Harper wasn't around to correct her. Her small voice trembling but clear enough to cut straight through whatever meeting he'd been about to walk into. Harper's hurting Mommy. She's hurting her really bad. Please come home. Please, please come home. Thomas's blood ran cold at the sheer terror in that small voice, so unlike the calm, quiet child he knew. Ella, sweetheart, where's your mom right now? Is she okay? She can't breathe, Ella said, and the words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Please come home, please, please. Thomas was already moving, phone still pressed to his ear, sprinting past his stunned assistant and out to the parking garage, telling Ella in as steady a voice as he could manage to stay hidden. Stay quiet, stay away from Harper until he got there. He broke every speed limit on the drive home, his mind racing through 100 horrifying possibilities. His hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel, praying with every red light that he wasn't already too late. Back in the hallway, Ava had managed, through sheer desperate strength, to wrench one of Harper's hands loose long enough to gasp in a ragged breath and drive her knee upward, catching Harper off balance just enough to break free from the wall. She stumbled sideways, coughing violently, her vision swimming, but adrenaline and pure maternal terror kept her moving, kept her searching frantically for her daughter in the same instant she was trying to put distance between herself and Harper. "Where is she?" Harper snarled, recovering her balance, advancing again with a wild, cornered look of someone who had crossed a line and now had absolutely nothing left to lose by finishing what she'd started. "Where's your daughter, Ava?" "Stay away from her," Ava rasped, positioning herself between Harper and the kitchen doorway where she prayed Ella was hidden safely out of sight. Her throat raw and burning, every breath a fight. "You're done, Harper. Whatever you were planning, it's over. I know everything." "You don't know anything," Harper spat, but there was real fear beginning to crack through her fury now. Fear of exactly how much Ava had heard. Fear of what would happen if Thomas ever found out the truth about the man in the gray jacket, about the life insurance policy, about everything she had built so carefully over the past several months. She lunged again, and this time Ava barely managed to sidestep her. The two women grappling in the narrow hallway, knocking a framed photo from the wall, the glass shattering across the floor. Ava's strength was fading fast. The choking, the panic, the sheer physical toll of the last several minutes catching up with her all at once. And for one terrifying moment, she genuinely believed she wasn't going to walk out of that hallway. And then, from the driveway outside, came the unmistakable screeching sound of tires. Thomas had made a 15-minute drive in under 9, running 2 red lights and barely avoiding a collision at the last intersection before his own street. His heart pounding harder than it ever had in any boardroom, any crisis, any moment of his entire life. He threw the car into park before it had fully stopped moving and was out the door and sprinting up the front walkway, Ella's terrified voice still echoing in his ears. "She can't breathe, please come home," with a fear clawing through his chest that he had never once experienced in 43 years of carefully controlled, carefully managed living. Have you ever had to make a choice this hard, with everything on the line in a matter of seconds? Share your story below. 2 minutes. That's all the time there was between Ella's phone call and the front door bursting open. Thomas didn't knock. He didn't call out a warning. He threw the front door open so hard it slammed against the wall, and the sound of it was enough to make both women in the hallway freeze mid-struggle, turning toward him at the exact same instant. What Thomas saw in that hallway would be burned into his memory for the rest of his life. Ava, disheveled and gasping, dark bruises already beginning to bloom along her throat, glass scattered across the floor from a shattered picture frame. And Harper, hair wild, eyes wide with something between fury and pure panic, one hand still raised as if frozen mid-motion, caught completely and undeniably in the act. There was no explanation Harper could give in that moment that would undo what Thomas had just witnessed with his own eyes. No soft voice, no gentle touch, no carefully rehearsed excuse could erase the image of the woman he'd planned to marry standing over his housekeeper with murder written plainly across her face. "Thomas," Harper started, her voice already shifting, already reaching for that old, practiced softness. "Thomas, thank God you're here. She attacked me. I was defending myself." "Stop." The word came out of Thomas low and shaking, not with hesitation, but with a kind of controlled fury he had never once shown in his entire adult life. He moved past her without another glance, crossing the hallway in 3 long strides to kneel beside Ava, checking the bruising on her throat with hands that trembled despite his best efforts to steady them. Ava, look at me. Are you okay? Where's Ella?" "Kitchen," Ava managed to rasp out. "She's in the kitchen. She called you. She saved my life." Thomas found his daughter, because in every way that mattered, that's exactly what Ella had become to him over the past year, even if the paperwork had never caught up to his heart. Huddled beneath the kitchen table, small arms wrapped around her knees, tears streaming silently down her face. He pulled her out gently and held her against his chest, feeling her small body shake with sobs she'd been holding back through sheer force of will, this tiny 3-year-old who had somehow, impossibly, been braver and clearer-headed than every adult in that house. "You did so good," he whispered into her hair, his own voice breaking now that the adrenaline was finally starting to fade. "You did so good, sweetheart. You saved your mom." It took the better part of an hour for the full truth to unravel. Ava, once her breathing steadied and a paramedic had checked her over, told Thomas everything, every overheard fragment, every suspicious phone call, every uneasy feeling she'd swallowed down for months rather than risk her job over a suspicion she couldn't fully prove. She told him about the man in the gray jacket, about the life insurance policy set to activate Thursday night, about the phrase that had chilled her to her core, an unfortunate accident for a stressed, overworked man. Thomas sat with that truth for a long silent moment, feeling something inside him rearrange itself completely. Every soft memory of the past year with Harper suddenly recast in a darker, colder light. The gentle mornings, the listening ear after long days. All of it, apparently, built on a foundation designed from the very beginning to end with him gone, and everything he'd built in someone else's hands. He looked at Harper, who stood near the front door now under the watchful eye of the 2 police officers Ava had insisted on calling despite her exhaustion. Her carefully constructed persona finally, completely stripped away, revealing something hollow and desperate underneath. He didn't ask her to explain. There was nothing left to explain. "You need to leave," he said quietly. "Tonight. And you are never coming back to this house again." The police, gathering statements and evidence for what would become a serious assault charge, asked Thomas directly whether he wanted to pursue the attempted fraud and conspiracy angle as well, given what Ava had overheard. Thomas hesitated, and in that hesitation was a whole year of memories he couldn't quite bring himself to erase completely, even now, even knowing everything he knew. He told the officers he needed a little time to think it through, that the assault charge against Ava was the priority for tonight, and something quieter, something almost like mercy, though it cost him visibly to offer it, kept him from pushing for every possible consequence in that first raw, devastating hour. As Harper was finally escorted out to a waiting car, her polished composure long gone, she turned back one last time, her eyes cutting past Thomas entirely and landing instead on Ava, who stood in the doorway with Ella held tight against her hip. "This isn't over," Harper said, low and venomous, the last mask finally dropping completely. "You think you've won. Watch yourself, Ava. Watch that little girl of yours too." The door closed behind her before anyone could respond, the car pulling away into the darkening evening, and for a long moment, the house stood in a silence that felt different from every silence Thomas had known since his mother passed. Heavier, but somehow also lighter, like a held breath finally released. Thomas turned to Ava and Ella standing together in the doorway, and something in his chest ached at how small they both looked, how much they had carried alone for so many months while he'd been too distracted, too trusting, too wrapped up in his own grief and work to notice what was happening right under his own roof. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I should have listened. I should have believed you the first time you tried to tell me." "You believe us now," Ava said quietly, pulling Ella a little closer. "That's what matters." In the weeks that followed, Thomas installed a security system that would have made a bank vault jealous, quietly moved a significant portion of his assets into accounts Harper could never touch, and made absolutely certain, through every legal channel available to him, that Harper Lang would never again come within a mile of his home, his housekeeper, or the little girl who had saved a woman's life with nothing but a speed dial button and a 3-year-old's fierce, uncomplicated love. The warning Harper had thrown over her shoulder haunted him more than he let on, and he made sure, every single day after, that Ava and Ella never had reason to feel unsafe under his roof again. There's a particular kind of truth that gets buried under charm and convenience, and it often takes the quietest, smallest voices in a room to finally drag it out into the light. Ava had spent months swallowing her instincts because she was afraid no one would believe her. Ella, too young to understand fear the way adults do, acted anyway, because love at 3 years old doesn't know how to hesitate. Sometimes the people who see the truth most clearly are the ones the world is least likely to listen to. And sometimes all it takes is one brave choice to change everything. To everyone who stayed with us through this story tonight, thank you. If it reminded you to trust your instincts a little more, or to listen a little closer to the quiet people in your own life, we hope you carry that with you. Sometimes the smallest voice in the room is the one telling the truth. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat the way it did for us while we told it, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people discover stories like Ava and Ella's. If you want more real, emotional, edge-of-your-seat stories, hit subscribe because we bring you a brand new one every single week. Tell us in the comments, what part of this story hit you the hardest, and did you see that twist coming? We read every single comment, so don't be shy. And if you know someone who needs a reminder tonight to trust their gut instinct, please send this video their way. Thank you so much for watching, friend. We'll see you in the next story.